Our next speaker is a vice chair of Brooklyn for Peace. David Tchaikovsky is going to talk to us about some of the political implications of what we're hearing here today. David?
I will start off by saying, when I was asked to think about drones, what got to me was not the fact that they can kill people, but that they're about seeing everything. The whole point of a drone is to see everything that's going on the ground, and that the seer is unseen, and actually is controlling the whole situation. That has historical resonances, at least for me. It reminded me of an English philosopher, a great English philosopher of capitalism, named Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham was the advisor of something called the panopticon, which means the all-seeing thing. It was supposed to be this super-duper prison in which one person could see the entire facility. But Mr. Bentham's ambitions were not limited to prisons. He created something he called the inspection principle, and I think you might find it interesting. Let me read you from a letter of his from 1787. We'll then talk about how it fits into drones. He says, to say it all in one word, it would be found applicable, I think, without exception, to all establishments whatsoever, in which, within a space not too large to be commanded by buildings, a number of persons is meant to be kept under inspection, no matter how different or even opposite the purpose, whether that be of punishing the incorrigible, guarding the insane, reforming the vicious, confining the suspected, employing the idle, maintaining the helpless, curing the sick, instructing the willing in any branch of industry, or training the rising race in the path of education. In a word, whether it be applied to the purposes of perpetual prisons in the room of death, or prisons for confinement before trial, or penitentiary houses, or houses of correction, or workhouses, or manufactories, or madhouses, or hospitals, or schools. It is obvious that in all these instances, the more constantly the persons to be inspected are under the eyes of the person who should inspect them, the more perfectly will the purpose X of the establishment have been attained. Let me repeat that sentence, because I think that is really crucial to understanding what all of this is about. And I mean all of this. It is obvious that in all of these instances, the more constantly the persons to be inspected are under the eyes of the person who should inspect them, the more perfectly will the purpose X of the establishment have been attained. Ideal perfection, if that were the object, would require that each person should actually be in that predicament during every instant of time. This being impossible, or maybe it isn't with drones, the next thing to be wished for is that in every instant, seeing reason to believe as much, and not being able to satisfy himself to the contrary, he should conceive himself to be so. Jeremy Bentham, 1787. So let me say, it struck me in reading this that all subaltern peoples, to use a phrase of the day, are a combination of incorrigible, insane, vicious, suspected, idle, helpless, sick, the willing, or the rising race in need of education. That's the way the ruling order sees them, quite literally, and in some combination all the time. Well, then how do we apply this principle to empire outside of limited buildings? We start with a compliant government, preferably with a formal democracy, but if not, say in Egypt or other places, so be it. problem is that things get out of hand, right? People tend to revolt, and the persons to be inspected rebel. So under the eyes of the persons who should inspect them, the first line of attack is always the local government, often with the aid of such actors as semi-governmental actors. We had a few of those in Central America during the 1980s, right? Certain death squads. The Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the paramilitaries in Colombia today. And of course, we occasionally have to engage in our own rather prophylactic measures, such as an assassination like Lumumba in Africa or Osama bin Laden when needed. And with regard to the assassination aspect of this, of course, we need usually a team from the CIA or the Navy SEALs. But as with every human enterprise, there's an opportunity to go wrong. Right? And we've seen this even with the best assassination teams historically. So when the Israeli Mossad tried to assassinate Khalid Mashal, who was the head of Hamas back in 1998, they found him on a street in Jordan, and they injected him with a lethal toxin. Unfortunately for the Israelis, they were caught. King Hussein said to the Israelis, "You better give us the toxin right away." The Israelis said no. Hussein called President Clinton and said, "You better give him the toxin right away." And a guy named Benjamin Netanyahu coughed up the toxin. Human enterprise can go wrong. And as we know, when the government and the people get together and rebel, the eyes of the persons who should respect them comes in the form of an army of occupation. And we've seen this. Even when somebody like George Bush knows better. Now, with an army, there's always a problem because it is a human enterprise. And we know this from studies back in World War II. There was a gentleman named S.L.A. Marshall who found that less than 25% of the soldiers in World War II actually fired their guns. That's the American Army in World War II. This is, the largest army we had, the most successful military. His view was that less than 25% fired their guns. So American military doctrine for the last 70 years has been largely devoted to dealing with that problem. That's a big part of what basic training is all about. There's been a lot of discussion about whether those statistics actually hold in general. But what is the ultimate dream here? And the answer is we solve the problem with the army of occupation. We solve the problem with soldiers not firing with magic machines, video games. You get the picture. The persons who inspect them, the persons who should inspect them, to use Bentham phrase, who are these people? Now, historically, these people are professionals, right? That's who has become the keepers of the prisons, the keepers in the hospitals, keepers in education. Those are professionals. And the public has been removed from both participation and, as Foucault points out, the actual, any decision-making about the process of punishing the incorrigible or guarding the insane or reforming the vicious, confining the suspected, etc., etc. As we know from our own experience here in New York, the arc of capitalism is that essentially all of these functions sooner or later get privatized. Right? That's what's going on in our city right now. And that's what's going on with our prisons. We have prisons that are being privatized. We have education that is being privatized in the form of charter schools across the board. All of these professionalized functions not only become removed from the public, but they become part of the corporate domain. That is the arc of where things have gone. And the same arc is true with the military, right? With regard to both the observed and the observers. And we have seen that there is a career military now. We have ended public participation in the military by not having a draft. We used to have a draft. We have now, in Afghanistan, more contractors than we have troops. We have more contractors dying than we have troops dying. To quote the New York Times, even the dying has been outsourced. That's true for Americans, but of course it is not true for the Afghans. So I think of drones as being emblematic of this private and privatized war-making. With drones, you don't have a need for anything public. There's no need for an army with drones. There's no need for a Navy SEALs team with drones. You can outsource a drone to a call center. You can, make that a video game center. And you can make it cheaper and therefore more profitable by sending it out to a center, I don't know, Mumbai, Johannesburg, fill in the blank. That's where this is going. So the question I would ask is why as peace activists should we be concerned? With due respect to the previous speaker, we've had plenty of instances where the United States government has overtly come and toppled governments that we didn't like. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Dominican Republic in 1965. Right? There are any, we can go through the history of Latin and Central America. We took over governments overtly with impunity. We just expanded the field in which we're doing this. At this point, it's, we've had an unchallengeable military-industrial complex in this country for, at least since the Eisenhower administration, as he pointed out. And corporate feeding at the public trough of a war-making goes back at least to the Civil War. I mean, that's where Morgan, for instance, made his fortune, right? With bad horses going to the Union military. And if you want to be optimistic, you can always take the position that technology will never solve any of the war-making problems. It never does. I mean, we've seen this idea that somehow technology is going to solve the problems of war-making in the past. It was called bombing. Right? That's what bombing was. It was supposed to be the thing that would obviate the need to actually send troops into the ground. Well, that never has worked, as we know. And surgical bombing has never been surgical, except in the sense of, causing blood to flow. And, as we sit here now, we can take comfort from the probability that sooner rather than later, there's going to be technology that will be developed and be deployed that will be able to disrupt the actual, deployment of drones. And whether that's going to come from China or anonymous or, somebody else, you can, as it were, be comforted, if you want, by, the realization that it is probable that we are not going to, have, what should I say, the impunity that drones have, given the military and the private contractors forever. But I do think that there is something here that is worth worrying about, and that's this whole corporatization and privatization of war-making. This culture used to find war profiteering reprehensible. A guy named Truman made his political reputation during World War II, pointing out how terrible it was that certain companies were actually making profits off the military. That is completely beyond the pale of discussion at this point. And we need to start to think about how to go back to those halcyon days of World War II, when it was actually considered a bad thing to be a munitions maker and a war profiteer. A vampire. It has to grow or it dies. It has to suck the blood of increasing profit or it dies. And especially in a system like we have, where we have $1, one vote, it seems to me that we are stuck with as the corporatization of war increases, the endlessness of war will increase as well. Those go hand in hand. And we need to be, as a peace movement, pretty critical about what we've done and how we've been doing it. And I speak about someone who has been active in this for a good while. We, for instance, cooperated with ending the draft. And I think that we have to own up to the fact that that was a terrible mistake that we made. We have let the Lyndon and Dickey fund the Vietnam War essentially without any tax increases, which meant that people did not, once the troops came home, people did not feel that war. And we have let our leaders for the last 20 years fund all of the endless wars, essentially by borrowing the money and making our kids pay for it. It's a terrible mistake that we have made, and we've been too silent about the essential privatization of all the military functions. And I think that we've got to own up that we have been wrong about this, and it's time for us to change. And I think that we need to, if we're going to build a majority movement to turn this around, we should be explicit about a few things. First is the right not to be surveilled. We need to be very clear that this is a basic human right that the government, neither governments nor corporations, have. And that's true for the people in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's true for us in the United States. It's true when we go into work and our employers are looking on our computers all the time. It's true when Google is looking at every move we make, however we make it. And it's true with the New York City police when they stop and frisk young men of color. All of this, it seems to me, is part of the panopticon that Bentham was talking about and that is in place in various aspects of our society. Second, we need to be fiscally responsible. Not just because we have kids and they're going to have to pay for these stupid wars that we have been borrowing against. But I think we want to start talking about things like making taxes on cell phones or taxes on internet uses as a way of funding these wars rather than making our kids pay for them. And I think that we have to have a discussion in the peace movement about reinstituting the draft, what it means for employment, and how we can make the military actually subject to democracy. It's interesting that drones have prompted this, but I think that we are at as I think all the speakers have indicated, a pretty desperate time in our democracy, and I think it is really thanks to Nick and to Medea for your wonderful work in raising these very important issues at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I think it raises some questions, too, about whether we need to be calling for prohibition against lobbying by arms makers, whether anyone who's the head of an arms industry should make more than $1 a year, whether arms makers should be making campaign contributions. So thank you. Our final speaker, and I would say one of the hardest working anti-war persons in show business is Deborah Sweet, and she has that very dangerous quality of doing what she says she's going to do, and encouraging other people who work with her to do the same thing. Deborah has been very much at the forefront of reminding America that torture has gone on, is going on, and that it's very discomforting illegality that Glenn Ford was talking about, other people talking about, profoundly affects people's lives every single day who have been found to be on the wrong side of the ambitions of our leaders. So I want to thank Deborah, and please welcome her.
Okay, well, this is not a roast of Meg Modern, but I have to thank you too. And about 2 years ago, Nick just about got us all killed in Greenwich, Connecticut. He called a protest with a prototype of this. And we went to this gated community in Greenwich where one of the drone makers, the CEOs of the drone companies lived. And we were having it was a good protest, but then one of them comes out and threatens to kill us, to drive over us, if we're protesting on the streets of Greenwich. And that was my first outing with Nick and the drone protests, and I thought, I think this guy's onto something. Right? If you could get that kind of a reaction in Greenwich, Connecticut. But I also have to say that we've gotten a very significant reaction in Brooklyn, New York over the last 3 days. I really thank Zora for speaking and opening up the whole concept of what are the people that are under these drones suffering. This is something that is not in our media. I'm sorry, but the New York Times goes along every single day with the Defense Department. Everyone killed by a drone is what? By definition, an insurgent or a militant. Just because they were killed by the U.S. drone program. That's what they are called. And of course, Obama has the nerve to say, no civilians have been killed by drones. How would he know that? For a system that cares nothing about the people in Pakistan, and I heard Zora talk about this the last time we did a panel, during the time the terrible floods came in Pakistan, was the only time the U.S. drone program was put a little bit, was pulled back a little bit. And it was only so they could save the drones from the flooding, not because they could help the people in Pakistan. This is the kind of bloodthirsty system that is carrying out this drone program in secret, and it is our responsibility to pull the blinds off of it. This is why it's important to be out on the streets in this way. And I really feel that an essential part of what we need to do is to go out among the public and take on the questions that we got over the last few days and the last few years related to people's feeling that the drones are making us safer. The drones are making us safer. Us that live in this country are safer because these drones are operating. The U.S. drone war is an extension of fundamentally illegitimate domination and wars for domination by our government. The biggest, best armed, historically largest empire in world history that is unchained and unchallengeable unless we do it. That's the role of ourselves on this gorgeous Saturday afternoon, when we know drones are flying on the other end of the world and soon to be flying here. I really think we also have a battle within the anti-war movement to grapple with the fact that, and we should talk about it here. I don't think that it's U.S. corporations that are driving the drone war. I can see that they're massively profiting from them. This is a cakewalk right now. The number of U.S. corporations going in to build the components of these drones, the fact that there's no oversight, and the fact that the U.S. military alone is increasing the number of drones, something like by a factor of 10 within the next couple of years. This is a growing business, but it is not Grumman. It's not all of these companies that are driving the war because they're going to make money off of it. There's a bigger system at play here. There is an imperialist system, which is looking to dominate and control the whole globe. This is what we have to grapple with. This is a huge factor in driving these wars, controlling the economies and exploiting billions of people. And we just have to be prepared to go there with people and look at that. Yes, the whole system does need to be changed. And a big part of it is if we could get a situation in this country where people here would say, we're not going to go along with it. Having the lawyers, and I know we have some lawyers here today, lay out the laws, having the activists like Glenn and David and Medea and Zora do the exposure about what's going on, and having people like Nick put his life on hold for a while and take this no drones tour around the country are extremely important. And what we most need is mass resistance against these wars. We really do need people in the streets, and I wanted to end on the note that people always say, okay, Miss Deborah, what is it we can do? There are a list of things that I think people can do. I plan to promote what Brooklyn for Peace did the last 3 days all over the country if I can. And I'm sure my sisters and brothers working in this movement will help. This is a hell of an important way to go out and do outreach and to bring forward. How many of you all did see the drones in Brooklyn in the last 3 days? That's a good percentage of the crowd, and if you haven't, imagine this in front of Trader Joe's at the corner of Court and Atlantic, multiplied by 3, and the number of people that stopped to talk about it. This is important. We don't have napalm to show people. We don't have a nuclear weapon to show people. We don't have M1 tanks we can take out on the street. But the man's technology has provided us with something that we can take out and show people. This is the killing that's being done in your name. And just one more note. When I hear the word we are doing this. It may be the government we live under that's doing it, but I always separate myself. I never feel when the U.S. government is doing something that it's I doing it, that it's we doing it. The government of this country has completely separate interests from the people, especially the people of the world. And I'll leave you with one idea and note that World Can't Wait has developed this year. Besides talking about stopping the crimes of our government, no matter who commits them, we're spreading the message that humanity and the planet come first. I thank you very much for doing this program, and especially Nick.